Hello, we are in the woods and I'm just going to talk to you about the kind of things that I look for when I'm actually setting up a camp. And we've just had a storm, so obviously everything is kind of damaged, and this is a really good time for me to show you some of the hazards that you might find in the woods and basically just give you some tips that I follow to keep myself safe. So I hope you enjoy. I think that the fact that everywhere else is trashed apart from here is a testament to the importance of really good shelter placement, whether it's a bushcraft shelter, a tarp, a tent, anything like that. You've always got to be aware of where you are actually planning to sleep. So when I actually make a shelter or I pitch a tarp or I'm planning to sleep somewhere, there are a lot of things that I try to keep in mind. So the first one is water. I make sure that I'm close enough to the water that I can access it for drinking, but I'm not so close to the point where I'm going to get disturbed by bugs. Another thing is resources. So obviously we've just had a storm, so there's more resources than there would usually be, but I try to make sure that I'm close to things like, dry wood, that's a resource, bedding, things like that you can use for bedding or thatching a shelter, like the pine boughs, bracken, grass, moss. You want to be surrounded by as many resources as possible, as close to your camp as possible, because that will just reduce the journey time for it, especially if you're building stuff. You don't want to have to walk half a mile and then back again just because you're trying to build a shelter. So you might not be able to pick it up on the camera, but there is actually a little stream down there. Another thing to be mindful of, or that I'm particularly mindful of, is widowmakers. And a widowmaker is something that could potentially fall on you in the night and cause you serious harm, injury, death, etc. This is a widow in the making. This is a making widower, because this is definitely something that could come down in the night regardless of whether it's windy or not. And as cozy as it may look under here, and as tempting as it may look, that is a death trap. So there's nothing stopping you from coming under here with a saw and, giving it a little test, pulling it, seeing if it's stable, maybe collecting some of these resources off here, but absolutely under no circumstance should you sleep underneath something like this. It is hung up on another tree, so some may argue that that technically means that it's stable because it's actually caught on something that's preventing it from falling any further. So you have to use your own discretion with things like this. But honestly, I personally would not take the risk. I would not sleep underneath here, ever. Just for comparison, I'll take you to something that I would sleep underneath. This fallen tree here, in fact, this one is quite good. This is something that I would consider turning into a shelter because it's relatively low to the ground. It's maybe only about my shoulder height. The base over there, I'll take you over there, the base has completely come away, so it's not leaning on its base, and it's actually caught on several trees up here that are also all laying kind of horizontally towards the ground. If you really wanted to, you could get a saw out, you could get all this away, clear a little space under here. You could then reuse all of these resources to actually thatch the back of your shelter, have a tiny fire, and that would be safe. Here's another one that's not safe. You can see that all that needs is too much wind. See, I can pull that. So I'll just show you the base of the one that is safe. You can see the tree has completely come away. There's no ambiguity about that. It's anchored in the ground. It's got roots sticking up in the air. It's absolutely perpendicular. So even here, for example, this is actually probably the safest bit. You can clear all this away. You can make a small shelter underneath there. We've done water, we've done widowmakers, obviously resources. Another thing that I try to consider is wildlife. So when you're actually walking around the woods and you see tracks and you know, broken branches, maybe at knee height, things like that. You always need to be mindful of the fact that this isn't where you live, this is where the other animals live. So if you think that there's any chance that you could be potentially camping on a trail, you know, for animals, for deer, badgers, something like that, if you see a lot of sign, so if you can see a lot of like scat, browsing by deer, things like that, then don't intrude on their space, move on and go somewhere else. Also, on the topic of wildlife, you need to consider bugs. They count. So are you camping next to a really, really dank, waterlogged, rotten stump that is the perfect breeding ground for horsefly and mosquito? You know, are you by the dank sort of flood waters that looks like it's festering something that's probably going to bite you in your sleep? If so, find somewhere else. Another consideration you need to make is the actual ground itself. So I'm not just talking about whether or not it's flat, whether or not it's waterlogged. That's sort of common sense. You want something that's as dry as possible and as flat as possible. But also you need to consider what the ground is actually made of. So this is all duff. We're in a coniferous woodland. We also have very peaty soil here, and peat is flammable. Before you actually set up a camp, you need to make sure that if you're going to have a fire on the ground, if that's permitted, do not go somewhere that is potentially going to actually have the ground itself catch fire. So peat, coniferous woodland that's got high resinous content, things like fat wood, duff, grass, a lot of bogs contain peat. You don't want to camp in a bog anyway. Just do a little bit of research before you go out and make sure that you're not lighting a fire in an area that could potentially then go into the ground, smoulder undetected, and then come up randomly and set the whole woodland ablaze. So just a really, really quick summary. You want to find somewhere that is safe. So you don't want biting insects. You don't want anything that's dangerous, you know, your widowmakers, your trees, your branches up here. Make sure that you look up. So you could camp potentially right here because there's nothing up there that looks suspicious. But if you look down, this is all lumpy bumpy. And we've got an ominous, suspicious looking stump there that could be harbouring insects that may visit you in the night. So this isn't a good spot. Area here, awesome. Nice and flat, protected from the wind, lots of resources, but you've got that hanging above your head, which could come down on you in the middle of the night, and that's not safe. So that's also not a good spot. Now this spot over here is away from all of the widowmakers, and you can tell if the wind blows, they're going to fall in the direction that they're leaning, just because that's where their weight is predominantly distributed. So as long as you're not underneath that, you're okay. So all things considered, somewhere like this would be your best option. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll probably notice that I revisit spots over and over again. You know, I have my fire in the same place, I camp in the same place. And the reason for that is because once you find the perfect spot, it's the perfect spot. And actually, it makes more sense to find the best spot, set up there and make that your permanent spot, than sort of totter about trying to find different spots and potentially putting yourself at risk because you've chosen to camp somewhere that is not safe. So the shelter that I have is in an optimal spot, no widowmakers, it's close to the water, and the fact that all the damage has occurred around the shelter but there's no damage actually anywhere, you know, there's nothing going wrong above it, the general area is clear, that is a testament for how important it is to choose a good space. Anyway, that was just a real quick walk around. I hope that was helpful. I'm actually out here filming something else, so you'll have to keep your eyes peeled for that. But yeah, that's what I do. That's the kind of things I am mindful about when I'm trying to choose somewhere that I'm going to camp. Hopefully some of those tips will help you, and yeah, be safe. If you like what you see and would like to see more videos from me, then be sure to like, subscribe, leave your comments down below, let me know what videos you'd like me to make, etc, etc. This was actually a subscriber request, so hopefully this helped you. That's enough from me. I've rabbited on for far too long. So yeah, thanks again. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the woods.